Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. My name is Teresa Barbert, and I have the very great privilege and pleasure to be the British Ambassador to Finland. And it is fantastic to see you all here this morning. Thank you very much for coming. Many of us will have said and thought that the 24th of February this year was a turning point of some kind. But in fact, we don't have to look very far back to see the roots of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. We can see it in 2014 in Crimea, we can see it in 2008 in Georgia, we can see it in 2004 in the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. And on a similar time frame, we have seen China's increasingly assertive approach with its Belt and Road Initiative, and with its territorial ambitions. Look at Taiwan, look at Hong Kong, look at the South China Sea. And although these places, some of them are very distant physically from Europe, we are seeing and feeling the real world impacts of these shifts. We see it in cyber attacks, we see it in the acquisition of infrastructure, and we are certainly seeing it in the security of our supply chains. Europe has been remarkably united over the past few months in particular, but I think there are still a lot of questions to ask and to discuss and possibly to answer about the role of Europe in coming months and years in this very seriously shifting geopolitical landscape. So I am delighted to have here a panel of excellent experts to help us discuss this and answer some questions, and they will be very willing to take questions, so please start to think about those now. We have Lord Ricketts, who has come from the UK especially for this session. Peter had a very distinguished diplomatic career, including as our permanent representative to NATO, ambassador to France, the Secretary General of our Foreign Ministry for 4 years, and the UK's first National Security Advisor. Thank you, Peter. We have Judith Gough, my colleague, who is British Ambassador in Stockholm currently, Ambassador to Sweden. Previously, immediately before that, Ambassador to Ukraine, and before that, Ambassador to Georgia, so a huge amount of expertise in that region. We have Hanna Ojanen, thank you, Hanna, from the University of Tampere, whose special interests are in security policy, including, of course, NATO and the EU, and the security policies of Nordic countries. And holding all of this together, we have Mikael Wigell. Thank you, Mikael, who is going to moderate, and who is a research director at FIA, with particular interests in geoeconomics, in hybrid threats, and in great power politics, all of which I think are very much in play here. So thank you, panel members, and I very much look forward to your discussion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mrs. Ambassador, and thank you for the invitation to moderate this excellent panel. I think we will be discussing quite pertinent issues here in our 45 minutes. So what I thought of doing is I'll start by throwing a few questions to the panelists, after which we can then open up and have a broader discussion. So if we start with Lord Ricketts, you've got a long experience in diplomacy and with defense and security policy. So I think it's fitting to ask you how you see the current situation. Are we heading towards a Cold War II? And if we are, how does this compare with the old Cold War? What are the differences sort of between these two periods? And also whether Europe is better or worse prepared for a possible Cold War II. So if you could reflect a bit on that.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Mikael, and thank you to Europa Forum for having me to the Turku for my first visit to this wonderful city, and to the British Embassy for inviting me. And yes, I'm afraid I'm old enough to have worked in the Cold War in NATO, on the UK delegation to NATO, which is bad for me, but gives me some perspective. And thinking about current period in relation to that. I think there are some differences and some similarities. I'm always a bit hesitant about easy analogies with historical events. But similarities, three quickly. We are back to a Cold War-style confrontation between great powers, something we haven't really had for the 40 years since the Cold War was over, and back to the whole worrying issue of nuclear deterrence. Second one, once again, Europe is on the fault line between two major ideologies and powers. And also, there is a part of the world looking on who sees this struggle in Ukraine as nothing really to do with them. That is also very much like it was in the Cold War. Thirdly, I think we're in for another long confrontation. I don't see the tensions over Ukraine and Russia's behavior falling in the short term. So all those, I think, are points of comparison. Points of difference. First of all, that the world is much more multipolar than it was in the Cold War. And in particular, the arrival of China as one of the two strongest economic and military powers in the world is a major new factor. And I would argue that China is actually a greater, longer-term threat to our way of life than Russia is. Secondly, the world is more economically diffused. Power is more diffused around the world than it was in the Cold War. Remember, at the beginning of the Cold War, America had 50% of the world's GDP. Now economic power is much more widely dispersed, and the world is more interdependent and interconnected. Even so, we can begin to see a very broad division developing between the democracies on the one hand and a group of China, Russia, and their supporters who aren't prepared to live by the rule of law and are developing a rather separate part of the world. The last difference, I would say, is that the world is more unstable than it was in the Cold War. Certainly in the later Cold War, there was a kind of strategic stability. There was a dialogue, there was a framework between the major powers for handling their divisions. After the shock of Cuba, the missile crisis, they developed that. We don't really have that now. And we can imagine two simultaneous global crises, actually, provoked by Russia in Europe and China, perhaps over Taiwan, which would really stretch the world's crisis management capacity. How well prepared is Europe, quickly? I think Europe is very well prepared for an economic confrontation, competition with Russia and China. Europe is much more integrated economically, tremendous powers of innovation, technology, trade, norm setting in the world as well. It's more stronger institutionally. The trouble is Russia is not seeking economic competition, it's seeking military competition. And there I think Europe is not well prepared. I think a whole generation has grown up, not so much in Finland, but in many parts of Europe, not thinking about the issue of war and peace at all, completely divorced from that, and lacking strategic culture. So Germany, yes, is very impressively turning to spend more on defense with its Zeitenwende, but it's going to be a long time before the culture in many countries in Europe is also adapted to the idea that we may have to be resorting to military force more to protect our freedom. And I think the EU is a long way from resolving its real profound debate about the nature of the EU as a world actor. Is it prepared to take a bigger role in defense and security than it has in the past? I think EU has performed very impressively, if I may say so, from the outside of the EU in responding to the Ukraine crisis. But if and when the tensions in Ukraine begin to fall, will the old underlying differences come back to the surface in the EU and in NATO on issues like energy security, like how to re-engage with Russia, like China? I think these are all underlying points of tension which are rather overlaid at the moment by Ukraine. So I think Europe is well prepared economically. It's not well prepared in terms of strategic thinking about a world which is now much more confrontational. That's why it's enormously important that Finland and Sweden are going to be joining NATO, I hope, as soon as possible. I think that's a benefit in terms of strategic unity, and it's why I personally devoutly hope that the UK can repair its relations with the EU as soon as possible so that there is as much unity and coherence among Western countries as possible.
Thanks. I think it might be worth delving a bit further on the role of Europe and Europe as a strategic actor. So the question is really what kind of strategic actor is Europe? I mean, Peter was mentioning that Europe is economically well prepared, but is lacking perhaps sort of strategic culture, especially on the military side. But does Europe have potentiality, certain potentiality to develop a more cohesive strategic culture and be more of a factor there? And especially perhaps in relation to Ukraine now, Europe is doing things to help Ukraine, but is it doing enough? Could it be doing something more?
Thank you, and first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and a huge thank you to Europa Forum, and also a huge privilege to be sitting on this panel, not least next to Peter, who, for a diplomat of my generation, is an absolute role model and icon, so it's not intimidating at all. But I think it's a really pertinent question, and I think my starting point is, what do we mean when we're talking about Europe? Are we talking about the European Union, or are we actually talking about the continent as a construct? And I think that's particularly pertinent now that the UK has stepped back from the European Union. And it's particularly relevant right now with President Macron putting forward proposals for a European political community. Now, I have to be very honest with you, I represent the British government. Peter is less shackled than I am in that sense. And we don't yet have a position on this because we are waiting for the outcome of our leadership election in the UK. But this is certainly something that we are going to discuss and debate. And I think in order for that to work, and I think there is a real necessity to look at stretching the debate beyond the European Union, it is going to have to be a broad church. It is going to have to include the Balkan countries. It's going to have to include Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, Turkey, most likely. And is going to have to genuinely address geopolitical issues. And I agree with Peter, I think the EU is very effective when it comes to economic crisis. But as a strategic actor and an adept strategic actor, I think there are issues that sometimes make it harder for the EU and the broader European family to react in a strategic manner. And if I look at my experience with Ukraine, I think the starting point is actually the soft power of Europe is extraordinary. If you go back to 2014 and the Maidan, which was the most extraordinary manifestation of the will of a people that wanted to move closer to Europe and to be a European nation. Yes, some of that was about overthrowing a corrupt government and a corrupt president, but it was about the European offer and what Europe stood for, and it was compelling enough to take people out onto the street. The starting point was Yanukovych not signing an association agreement with the European Union. So we have immense soft power, and in an increasingly competitive and contested world, we need to increasingly look at how we work together to defend our values, our borders, our principles, and our way of life, and they are under threat. The United Kingdom published in March 2021 a document which I recommend, not just because I'm representing the British government, but actually because it's a very good document, the Integrated Review. And it was very, very clear. We are entering a more contested era. Russia as the most acute threat, how right we were, but China as a systemic competitor. So Europe has to be a global strategic actor. I think the challenge comes when we're talking about that unity of purpose and drive, when we're still having an internal debate on values, when certain countries within the European Union are challenging some of those centrally held values. That creates a bit of a challenge. The energy question, again, yes, we have been extremely effective in our reaction to Ukraine. I can remember in 2014 when I was the director for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, after the illegal annexation of Crimea, wondering, would we get sanctions against Russia? It wasn't a given. We got them. They've lasted for 8 years. And my goodness, our strength has been in our unity and the strength of sanctions that we have imposed on Russia since. But that has to endure. And we need to be able to address questions such as energy. I think what I found in Ukraine is that whilst the EU was an effective strategic actor, for the Ukrainians it wasn't always the most effective strategic actor. That was actually the G7. Why? Firstly, I think for the Ukrainians it was a lot easier to engage with 8 ambassadors or 8 countries/entities, the European Union having a seat at the table. But also because I think they felt that 8 actually had a more common sense of purpose and set of values. And I think that was immensely powerful. I think the other interesting actor when I was there in Ukraine was actually the group of the Nordic Baltic countries. Why? Again, a manageable number of interlocutors, but also a core group of countries, like-minded, clear sense of purpose, and a clear offer and a clear ability to act. So I think there are layers within the onion when we talk about Europe, minilateralism, but also how we look more broadly. And my final point will be this. When we're talking about Europe as a strategic actor, we're talking about geography. And I think, as Peter's already mentioned, in an increasingly interconnected world, is that the right response? Ukraine, unfortunately, is seen as a regional issue. It's not. How many countries globally are now suffering food insecurity as a result of Russia's invasion on Ukraine and are looking at instability within their own countries precisely because of this conflict? So I think what my Foreign Secretary would argue at the moment is, yes, of course, we have to have a strong coherence and be a strategic actor on the European continent. But actually, democracies, and not just Western democracies, but those in the East as well, need to draw together and act as a strategic actor in our own right to defend our values and our way of life.
Thank you. Hanna, Finland and Sweden are likely to join NATO pretty soon, in the near future. And so to me the question is, how will NATO change through Finland's and Sweden's prospective accession, where will NATO as an organization and the way it functions change in some way? And also other way around, how will NATO accession change Finland and Sweden? We know that both countries have a long history of non-military alignment, which is about to change, and that might bring with it more deeper changes into strategic culture as well, and to foreign and security policy, and perhaps broader even to certain kind of cultural change. So if you could reflect a bit on those easy questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for the questions, Mikael, and thank you for the invitation. It is a real pleasure to be here. Yes, there will be changes. No, there is no doubt about that. And some changes are already visible. Others are to follow. And to see how things eventually turn out, I think it also depends on our answers to some fundamental background questions, such as, are these two countries, Sweden and Finland, are they really change makers, or do they rather adapt? And is NATO an organization that changes? What is the change potential in NATO? But I leave these questions for us to reflect on and propose instead 3 sets of changes that we are already discussing. And the first set of changes are changes that are obvious, but not at all insignificant. Starting from what you already mentioned, the two countries will no longer be militarily non-aligned, they will be aligned. And this is a huge change for Sweden, for its identity. Less so for Finland. For Finland, the big change is in its relations to Russia. So huge change there, rather. The big change for NATO, it gets 2 new member states, and enlargement is always highly consequential for an organization, no matter what countries join. We also see a major geographic shift towards the north, and NATO's border with Russia will more than double. Something not at all obvious, but all the more significant, is the change in Finnish influence on Swedish policies. This is what we perhaps didn't expect. That is an influence that also more than doubles. Second, there are changes that have already taken place, and notably changes in the way we speak about these things. We speak in a different way. Nowadays it is all about solidarity, support, commitment, capacity, and overwhelmingly the changes to come are depicted as very positive. NATO will be strengthened. It gets 2 very capable security providers that enter. Sweden and Finland will be stronger. They will be more able to influence NATO. Even Nordic cooperation will be strengthened. Happy we. I have also noticed something of an increased focus on NATO's role in prevention and deterrence rather than defense proper. These are very interesting shifts in the way we speak, and they no doubt partly stem from the need just now to reassure, to keep up the consensus about this entering being a very good move. Then a third set of changes, those that already emerge as topics in the political debate. There will be more NATO in the north, but exactly how? And there we already have something of a start of a political debate between parties in Finland. The National Coalition Party just advocating for a base headquarters or perhaps a center of excellence in Finland, whereas the Left Alliance would be against bases or troops permanently stationed here. In Sweden, the application already made it clear that Sweden would not be stationing permanent bases. And a second topic, perhaps for a broader Nordic debate emerging, is what is this Nordic contribution to NATO once all the 5 Nordic countries are in? Interestingly, Nordic defense cooperation is now seen to get more binding. It is not made redundant by the fact that all will be NATO members. Regional cooperation may be strengthened in some ways, and this could eventually be a model for NATO somehow in the future, even though for the time being we say there will be no Nordic bloc. Well, bloc or no bloc, the Nordics might have an interesting agenda to propose for NATO in the time to come. And I've heard 2 examples of issues that they might take up. One is fight against democratic backsliding. And the other is work for increased resilience in different forums. And I think this is already high on NATO's agenda, so that will be certainly discussed further. Thanks.
Thank you.
Very good.
So let's open up for questions and comments. Perhaps questions, not that many comments. Let's keep the questions short and concise. And please step forward here, perhaps, and if you could please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. My name is Henrik Leitenberger. I'm the head of EU affairs for technology industries of Finland, but I have also lived for quite a long time in the UK, and therefore this is a very interesting discussion to have here at Europe Forum as well. My question essentially is, we have now spoken a lot, and thank you very much for your very, very interesting contributions about the necessity to maintain essentially a strong cooperation both within and beyond NATO. And my question is that, however, the UK at the moment finds itself at a quite difficult moment, it seems, where it is on the one hand driven by kind of a domestic short-term interest that emphasizes disassociation from Europe as much as possible, and on the other hand, the long-term strategic interests of binding itself closer in multiple ways, essentially, to the European continent. And the question then becomes essentially what is essentially the way forward to making, because the problem here is that if we look then at the Northern Ireland Protocol, for instance, which obviously is currently the biggest hurdle, arguably, to EU-UK cooperation is that it is not so much a practical issue than it is, in the eye of the UK government at the moment, a strategic issue, because it's important to shore up support essentially among the pro-Brexit voting groups essentially. And the very simple question to a very complex topic is, how can this be overcome? And if there seems to be a hardened front that is likely going to get only harder now that Liz Truss is set to become likely the next UK Prime Minister.
Shall I perhaps lead off on that, because I'm not a spokesman for
happy
the
to talk to it as
British
well.
government,
Go
but
for it.
I mean, first of all, I want to start with Judith's distinction between the EU and Europe, because I think that is vital. I think the British ideological problem at the moment is with the EU. I mean, that's obvious. The referendum in 2016 was essentially an ideological referendum, and for the moment, the country is on a path of distancing itself from the EU. I personally think that's the wrong position for the UK to be in, but it's where we are. That does not mean to say, I think, that even in the areas of British political life that believe in being as distant as possible from the EU, that people believe we should be distant from Europe. Because when we come to defence and security affairs through NATO, through structures like the GEF in this part of the world, I think Britain is an enthusiastic supporter of working with other European countries. But that's a very difficult tension to manage, of course, because we found in practice it's hard to have a difficult, scratchy relationship with the EU and full-hearted cooperation with other European countries on defence and security issues. Those two things are in tension. I think the tension's been managed over Ukraine, and because we've mainly dealt with it through either NATO and the defence and security side, or in terms of sanctions, where I think there has been ad hoc cooperation between the EU and the UK, we've managed it. But for the future, I think it is a real issue. And I think in the area of your speciality, technology, China is probably the bigger issue than Russia, actually. And there, I think it's really important that Britain should get back to being able to have a dialogue with the EU on broader China policy. Because I don't think, actually, that European, including British, interests are absolutely the same as American interests when it comes to China. Of course, we need to be vigilant on anything to do with security, but I think all our countries need commercial exchanges with China to be preserved, while ensuring that technology, we don't become dependent on China for strategic technology. So we're in a difficult moment in British politics, quite honestly, at the moment, and it's going to take some time for the clouds to lift and for us to be able to see further forward. But I think the idea that Britain is working for strategic unity in Europe on issues of national security is our key in our system. The position on the EU is much more fluid. That's quite diplomatic.
It's very diplomatic. I mean, I think, again, I'll take you back to the integrated review that was written by the Boris Johnson government and is the UK view of 10 years out. And it was very, very clear. There was a line in there that says, the United Kingdom is a European country with global issues. So I think we're quite clear, or this government is quite clear, that whatever the institutional or the ideological issues with the European Union, we are still defining ourselves very much as a European country. And I think the other point, and I've had these conversations with Swedish ministers, there was a lot of hype around the United Kingdom having an Indo-Pacific tilt. And as one Swedish minister said to me, it's not as tilty as we thought it was going to be. And I think that's right. And I think all the evidence points to that. Ukraine has focused minds. The fact is that although there is scratchiness in certain areas, and I think that will continue and we will have to find a way through. When it comes down to security, defense, supporting Ukraine, standing up to Russia, actually the cooperation has been pretty good. When it talks, when we're looking at Europe's commitment to the security of Europe, judge us by our actions. Not so long ago, Teresa and I were hosting the Prime Minister in Hobsund and here in Helsinki to sign mutual security assurances. That was a very, very clear demonstration of commitment of the United Kingdom to Europe's security and defence, particularly in this region. Judge us by the amount of assets that we're putting through and the support that we are giving to both Sweden and Finland as you move towards NATO. So undoubtedly, while there are challenges, I think if you look at the issues that currently really matter to us, the United Kingdom is there and will continue to find a way to be there and to engage. NATO, the JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, also important to us, and so on and so forth.
Can I take up the issue of China? Because sort of you alluded to the China issue and the fact that we in Europe might not always have the same interests as the Americans when it comes to China necessarily. And now we find ourselves in a situation when relations between China and US seem to be deteriorating to some extent. And we might even find ourselves, if this really gets bad, in a sort of sanction spiral even between China and US going forward. So what's Europe's place in this? Can Europe kind of balance between China and the US, hedge to some extent? Can it mediate in this relationship, or how should Europe think of itself in such a scenario when we have possibly deteriorating relations between China and US?
Europe can't mediate, I think, between the US and China, but Europe does have its own interests, and I would include Britain as part of Europe in that. By which I mean the US and China are the world's two largest economies, two most powerful economic and increasingly military players. And America can afford an outright confrontation with China and to try to win a trade war and an outright economic confrontation, to try to cut off China from certain areas of technological development. Europe, I think, has a different set of interests. I mean, our economies, I think, need to be able to continue to trade with China. We've all taken major hits to our trade as a result of the pandemic. We're all facing recessions. We all need to find areas of growth. And the normal commercial relations with China outside the security area seem to me an area where Europe has an interest in preserving a degree of open trading arrangements. And so while we need to be absolutely solidaire with the Americans, show solidarity with them over issues of technology transfer, intellectual property stealing, ensuring that we have sovereign control of the technologies of the future, I think there are areas where Europe has distinct interests that it needs to pursue with China, and therefore we need quite a carefully nuanced policy, which we ought to be working out among Europeans in the first place. If it comes to a major conflict between America and China over Taiwan, I think the position of European countries is clear. We have to be in support of America, doing what we can to help the cause of democracy and freedoms in Asia. Some countries like the UK have military assets that we can bring to bear there. Others won't have, but we have a loyalty of solidarity, I think, with the Americans as our powerful ally. So that's how I would try and draw quite a nuanced picture of how we should approach the China problem, not a completely black and white approach, which some in America certainly favor.
We had one question back there. Is it still? Yes. Yep.
Thank you very much. My name is Ville Valkonen. I'm a member of the Finnish Parliament representing the National Coalition Party. And I'm very glad that you're bringing China up so strongly in this debate and discussion, because that is the struggle of this century. This systemic rivalry will be intensifying. And the West needs to decide which side will eventually gain the upper hand. And I think that a key part of this struggle will be not just internal development in China and the West, but the rest of the developing world. Yeah. And I was a little bit shocked, I don't know if I should have been, but surprised also about the reaction of most of the developing countries on the globe, on the planet, towards or with regards to the Ukrainian crisis. And looking at this picture, it's not clear at all that the West is winning the hearts and minds in the large, at least on paper, democracies of India, many African countries, even South America. So what should be the policies, especially from the European countries, regarding the rest of the developing world in this big struggle between two different systems and two different worldviews. Perhaps maybe more thoughts on especially Africa. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to go right at it?
Well, I mean, I think you put your finger on an absolutely crucial point for all our countries for the future. Maybe we've taken too much for granted the idea that every country in the world understands that the rule of law, the UN Charter, protection of smaller countries from large, powerful neighbors with bad ideas about them. Maybe we've taken too much for granted that all countries accept that that is fundamentally important to them. Certainly, I think in our democracies we accept that. And what Russia did in Ukraine is a blatant violation of all those UN Charter principles about the use of force. And yet, as you say, many, many countries are sitting on the fence. Even powerful countries, democracies like India, countries like South Africa, countries like Brazil, and many smaller countries, they don't see it as their issue, as directly affecting their national interests. Why not? Because it does. I think, as Judith said, the impact on energy prices, on food security, is impacting especially the poorer countries around the world, and yet they don't make the link. Why? I think it's partly because they look at it like the Cold War. You know, it's some fight between countries in the northwest corner of the world, a long way from them, and not really affecting their interests. Partly because they feel they have higher priorities, and partly because China's been very effective in working with a lot of countries, with its aid, with its aggressive diplomacy, to try to recruit these countries into a sort of soft, China-oriented bloc. And the West has not been as active. So I think it's a wake-up call, if I may say so, to all of us, to work in the longer term to show that this rules-based system we set up after the Second World War in the UN really matters to smaller countries, indeed larger ones, around the world as well, and that they shouldn't take that for granted. But I don't think we can win that fight in the short term. I think it's a long-term explanation, demonstration to them that they have interest in this too. It's not just a fight between the old Cold War adversaries.
Yes, indeed. A very good question, and I think this brings sort of two conclusions. Conclusion is too strong a word, but sort of intermediate conclusions. One is that we need to pay much more attention to countries outside of the West or the superpowers and understand much better what they actually aim at and what their positions are, and not neglecting them, because that really matters. And the other aspect of the question is what the ambassador just brought up at the start about Europe's soft power or power at large, paying more attention to how that could be increased or how Europe could be made more coherent and more precise in its actions. A lot to do, really, there.
One would think that Europe actually has good possibilities for that, considering that, yes, China has been very successful in binding a lot of countries to itself through investments and loans and through economic instruments. But there has also been a lot of problems with corruption and investments not then materializing, actually, and very sort of bilateral relationship where China is always the stronger part and the other ones are in a weaker position. So in that sense, perhaps Europe could offer something a bit different, something more balanced in that sense.
I think my sense is there is something about how we engage. We haven't won the arguments with a lot of countries around the world when it comes to issues that genuinely are global in nature, whether it be climate change, whether it be Ukraine, for example, and so on and so forth. And I think some of that's about having a little bit of humility. I think often we're seen in the West as preaching and as telling people that our values and our approach is the one way and the only approach. And I think there is something about the consideration of how we engage and how that comes across, because we're clearly not winning the arguments across the board. And we need to be better at winning those arguments, because actually we do have a compelling proposition. And again, I think it comes back to the challenge that we're not even winning the arguments in other democracies across the world. And I think part of the challenge is we're talking about the West as some exclusive club that is right, and there is the rest of the world. And somehow we need to be better in how we present this and how we engage. I think there's also something around actually how we have handled the Ukraine crisis. And I'm very struck, particularly in this region, and that's not to apportion any blame whatsoever, but if you talk to some other countries, they very pointedly make the point that there are two different types of refugees. There are the Ukrainian refugees who come to our countries and immediately get assistance and free transport and so on and so forth. And then there are other types of refugees who don't get the same level of treatment. Now that's something for policymakers to debate, but again it has an impact on our ability to make the arguments that we need to make in order to bring the rest of the world with us.
Perhaps we have time for one very quick question and very quick answer, and then we're done.
Thanks very much, everyone. Teresa knows me. I'm Ruth Park, and I'm the Irish ambassador to Finland. And thank you very much for being here and for this discussion. And I really appreciate it. And I think I don't have to mention the Northern Ireland Protocol because it's already been mentioned. But I want, and you're getting to what I was going to ask, actually, which I think you've already answered a bit. It's that roundup. So I've been very struck in listening to all of you speaking. But particularly to my colleague, Austin's colleague in Stockholm, but also to Lord Ricketts, about values, strength and unity, norm setting. It's not just about politics, it's not just about us against them, it's also about how we deal with technology issues, how we work together to ensure that our data is preserved, how we work together to make sure that we are on a team. And I think, yes, you've explained that there are very difficult issues and some things will take a long time, but we don't have a lot of time. We have, a very important 3 or 4 month period coming up here. And I'd just be interested to understand, when you talk about we and about Europe and about unity and strength and working together, how you see that happening now in the next sort of 6 weeks to 4 months, because that's important. Thanks very much.
Quick answer? How do you do a quick answer to that? And the British politics has been off the air for the last 3 or 4 months. Honestly, we're on care and maintenance because of our leadership competition. And that comes to a head on the 6th of September. We'll know who the new Prime Minister is. But even then, it's going to take some weeks. And the new Prime Minister's first priority is going to be dealing with a massive domestic crisis over the cost of living and the cost of energy, the sort of crisis that is also washing over every other European country. So to be absolutely honest, I don't think we can expect an enormously clear input of British foreign policy over the next few weeks. The subject of the Northern Ireland Protocol is about to come to my part of Parliament, the House of Lords, where it will be subject to several months of debate. So that is going to be an issue that isn't going to come to a head until certainly into next year. But I think Ukraine, the energy crisis, policy towards Russia, policy towards China, those are the issues that can't really wait. And there, when I think I talk about we, I mean Europeans more collectively, rather than our particular difficulties with the EU internally over issues like the Northern Ireland Protocol. Those big issues we can deal with together, I think.
I think we have to thank the panel now and the audience. Sorry, we're a bit over. So thanks a lot. I think this was really a rich discussion.